I didn't even make it past the main hallway before I heard it. A whisper, soft and deliberate, calling my name. Not from a child, not from a coworker, but from somewhere behind a peeling wallpaper. Somewhere the shadows should not reach. My stomach twisted. The orphanage smelled of bleach and old wood, but beneath it lingered something sour, almost metallic, like iron left out in damp soil. The flickering bulb above me buzzed in uneven pulses, casting jagged shadows that slithered along the cracked floorboards. Each creak echoed too long, like the house itself was stretching, waiting. I gripped my flashlight tighter, the cold metal bite of my fingers, and I forced myself to take another step. My shoes scuffed against scattered toys, dolls with blank faces, a tiny rocking horse swaying though I hadn't touched it. A distant door slammed somewhere down the corridor, sharp and sudden. My heart jumped into my throat, and I froze. Silence swallowed the orphanage immediately afterward, but it was too thick, too absolute. Even my own breath sounded alien in that void. Then came a faint giggle, high-pitched, echoing, but not playful. It was deliberate knowing, like it belonged to someone who had been waiting for me all along. I thought I saw a movement out of the corner of my eye, a small shadow slipping behind a doorway, stopping just short of visibility. My skin prickled. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but the responsibility of the night shift, the unseen eyes of children depending on me, anchored me in place. And then the temperature dropped. My breath puffed in white clouds, curling upward like smoke, and the air smelled sharp, iron-laced. Something shifted near the end of the hallway, a dark shape stretching impossibly across the floor. I couldn't tell if it was a trick of the light or something alive, but I heard the whisper again, closer, urgent, almost pleading. I swallowed hard, shaking, knowing instinctively that whatever it wasn't going away. And then, as I took a cautious step forward, a door slowly creaked open on its own, just a sliver, revealing nothing but blackness within. I froze, my flashlight flickered, and I realized, with a chill that burrowed into my bones, that this night would be nothing like I had expected. I had only been a night caretaker for a week, though it felt like a lifetime by the time I arrived at the orphanage that evening, fresh out of training. With trembling hands and a notebook of procedures I barely remembered, I promised myself I could handle it. Watching over children while the world slept was supposed to be simple. Check the rooms, monitor the cameras, ensure no one wandered into danger. That was what they said. But nothing in the handbook prepared me for the weight of silence that settled over the place after sundown. The orphanage itself was a relic from another century. Peeling paint revealed years of neglect, and the long hallways stretched further than they should, as if the building had been designed to confuse intruders. Toys that scattered across the floor like forgotten memories. Teddy bears with glassy eyes staring up at me. Small wooden trains frozen mid-track. The smell of disinfectant clashed with the faint mustiness of damp wood, creating an atmosphere both sterile and decayed. The flickering overhead lights hummed a tired, electric tune that made the shadows dance in jerky, unsettling patterns. I accepted the night shift for practical reasons. Extra pay, experience, and the quiet hours I thought would let me catch up on studies. But beneath that, there was a whisper of curiosity, a subtle thrill in being alone in a place that most staff avoided after dark. I reminded myself constantly, this was about responsibility. I was here to protect, not to explore. Every creak of floorboard, every sigh of the old building became a test of my professionalism. Yet, from the first moments, I felt uneasy. A blanket lying perfectly folded in the nursery of the day, before it was now draped across the corner like a shroud. A lullaby played faintly on a loop in the far room, though I was certain no device was on. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Light, rapid, almost playful. But when I rushed to check, the corridor was empty. My mind tried to rationalize. Drafts, settling floorboards, an overactive imagination. But the rational explanations grew thinner with each passing minute. Part of me dreaded what I might find. Yet another part felt tethered by duty. If something was wrong, I had to intervene. My training emphasized vigilance, the care of vulnerable children. That moral weight pressed against my chest, making every shadow seem alive, every whisper significant. I wondered whether my inexperience was a liability, whether my fear would blind me at the moment when calm action mattered most. Even as I moved from room to room, noting the children's breathing and the quiet of their sleep, a nagging sensation persisted. Tiny disturbances that made the air feel charged. Doors slightly ajar, shadows that lingered longer than they should, whispers that trailed off as I approached. I knew instinctively that this night would demand more than my training. It would demand courage I wasn't certain I had. And then, as I stepped in the main hallway, the same whisper returned, sharper this time, almost urgent, and the faint outline of a small figure appeared at the far end of the corridor. My pulse spiked. I wanted to tell myself it was a trick of the light. That exhaustion had blurred reality. But deep down, I knew better. Something was waiting. Something was watching. I swallowed hard, gripping the flashlight like a lifeline, and took the first tentative step toward it, unaware that each movement forward would drag me deeper into a night I would never forget. I forced myself to keep moving down the hallway, flashlight trembling in my hand. Every shadow seemed to shift when I blinked, stretching across the walls like dark fingers reaching for me. The orphanage was silent, yet not silent. There was a rhythm beneath the quiet, subtle and insistent. A faint scraping sound came from the end of the corridor, like tiny nails across the floorboards. My first instinct was to call out, but the sound stopped abruptly, leaving only my own breathing echoing back. I checked the nursery first. The room was empty, the children asleep, yet the rocking horse in the corner had moved again, its slow sway casting long, uneven shadows on the walls. I tried to rationalize. Draft. I whispered to myself, gripping the cold metal of the flashlight tighter. But the temperature had dropped sharply, my breath curling in front of me in visible puffs, though the heat in the building's old furnace should have kept the rooms warm. My chest tightened. There was a scent now, a faint mix of iron and decayed wood. That made my stomach turn. As I stepped into the next hallway, I noticed something even stranger. The walls were no longer uniform in their decay. The peeling paint formed shapes that resembled faces, some smiling, some contorted in silent screams. My rational mind told me it was just my imagination, but the air felt heavy, oppressive, almost alive. I remembered a case from my training. A caretaker who swore she saw shapes in the hallways of another orphanage late at night. She left after her first shift, claiming she could not distinguish the real from the imagined. Now, I understood how that could happen. I paused near the end of the hallway, listening. Footsteps, light, hesitant, but unmistakable, echoed behind me. I spun around, flashlight beam slicing through the darkness. Nothing, just shadows. But then the whisper returned, soft at first, almost comforting, then sharp, repeating my name. It was coming from somewhere to my left, behind the old storage closet. I approached cautiously, each step deliberate, the floorboards groaning under my weight. As I reached the door, the whisper stopped, absolute silence. And then a toy chest slammed shut by itself, as if startled by my presence. My heart leapt into my throat. I tried to shake the fear, reminding myself that I was here to protect the children. My duty demanded vigilance, not hysteria. But the moral weight pressed heavily on me. If I fled now and something happened, I would carry the guilt forever. Even rational explanations felt hollow. The shadows moved differently in each hallway. A door that had been closed a moment ago now stood ajar. I could feel eyes on me, though the children slept. Was it my imagination or something else? I reached the main hall again, drawn inexplicably toward the old grand staircase. The floorboards creaked beneath my steps, each sound amplified in the deadened air. The shadows of the railing twisted like serpents along the walls. Then I heard it, a soft, low hum coming from the basement door, almost melodic, like a lullaby out of tune. The sound drew me closer, my mind torn between curiosity and instinctive fear. I stopped, heart pounding, staring at the dark opening. The faint glow of the hallway light barely penetrated the darkness below, yet something moved in the shadows. Just a blur, too fast to catch, but unmistakable in its presence. I stepped back, rationalizing that it could be a curtain moving or the flickering light. But the air grew colder, and the smell of iron stronger, suffocatingly close. My hand shook as I reached for the banister, fingers tracing the carved wood, rough and splintered. I could hear whispers now in multiple directions, echoes bouncing off walls, some clear, some indistinct. My pulse hammered so loudly I feared it would give away my position. Every instinct screamed that I was not alone. I remembered the cautionary advice from a senior caretaker. Never trust the silence in an old building. It has its own life. I had dismissed it as superstition. Not anymore. I moved cautiously toward the kitchen, hoping for rationality. The place was empty, yet a chair scraped across the floor as though pulled by invisible hands. I froze, frozen in disbelief and terror. Then I noticed the small cabinet above the sink was open. Inside were children's cups and plates, but one cup had fallen over, spilling water in a perfect arc, forming a thin pool that reflected the flickering light like a mirror. And in that reflection, I saw a face, not one of the children, nor any I recognized. Hollow eyes stared at me from the darkness behind me. I spun, flashlight swinging wildly. Nothing, but the reflection remained in the puddle, grinning slowly. Panic began to seep into my mind. My training emphasized calm, measured responses, yet the building seemed to defy logic. Shadows lengthened unnaturally. Floorboards groaned as if under weight that wasn't there, and whispers layered upon whispers. I realized I could not tell the difference between imagination and reality anymore. Each corner, each doorway, became a potential threat. My professional instincts told me to check on the children, to secure their safety, yet my rational mind feared what I might encounter in the halls. I tried to take a deep breath, focusing on the task at hand, but the sound of tiny footsteps approached from behind, soft, deliberate, matching my pace perfectly. I froze. My mind raced. Was it a child awake, or something else? The air grew denser, carrying that metallic scent that made me gag. The whispers returned, urgent, calling my name, circling me like an unseen predator. I couldn't tell which hallway they came from. I couldn't tell if I was imagining it. Every instinct screamed for me to move, yet every professional instinct demanded caution. I gripped the flashlight like a weapon and stepped forward, forcing myself toward the nursery again. I noticed the toys had shifted yet again, blocks spelling out letters that made no sense, a doll sitting upright when I remembered laying it flat. And then at the far end of the room, a shadow detached itself from the wall and began to move toward me. Not a child shape, not fully human, yet unmistakably alive. My heart stopped. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But duty anchored me. I had to know what it was. I had to see. And then I saw it. Something that defied explanation. Something that blurred the line between what a caretaker should protect and what should have never existed in the first place. But what I saw next still keeps me awake at night. I knew I shouldn't have stepped closer, yet something drew me forward, a combination of dread and responsibility that no rational thought could deny. The shadow in the nursery did not belong to any child. It was too elongated, too fluid, shifting in ways that defied the geometry of the room. My flashlight trembled in my hand, its beams slicing through the darkness in erratic pulses, revealing glimpses of what should have been impossible. Then I saw it fully, a small figure, shaped vaguely like a child, but its eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, hollow and unblinking. Its lips moved, whispering words I could not comprehend, but I felt their meaning, warning, pleading, despair. I stumbled backward, almost tripping over a pile of toys. Every professional instinct I had screamed at me to retreat, to call for backup, yet my role as caretaker anchored me to the spot. These children were under my protection, and if this whatever was posed a threat, I had confronted. The temperature dropped sharply, each breath coming out in visible puffs that curled and twisted unnaturally. My skin prickled as though invisible fingers were tracing my spine. The air reeked of iron, of blood long since dried, mingled with the faint sweetness of decay. I gagged, forcing myself to stay focused. My flashlight flickered again, and in the brief flashes of light, the figure multiplied, shadows stretching, detaching, forming vague shapes around the room. They were silent now, but the weight of their presence pressed into my chest, almost tangible, almost alive. I reminded myself of the ethical responsibility I carried. My duty was to protect these children, to maintain safety, to ensure that even my fear did not compromise their well-being. But what did protection mean when the threat could not be understood, when the laws of reality seemed suspended? Should I approach? Should I flee? Every option felt wrong, every decision morally loaded. And yet, as a night caretaker, hesitation was not a luxury I could afford. Then it moved toward me, a sudden jerky motion that made my heart stop. I could see now that it had no feet touching the floor, drifting a few inches above the boards. Its small hands reached out, pale and impossibly long, tipped with shadows that seemed to dissolve into the air. I flinched, expecting contact, yet felt nothing but a rush of cold wind, chilling me to the bone. My mind raced. Was this a supernatural phenomenon, a manifestation of the building's history, or some trick of light and exhaustion? None of the rational explanations could account for what I was seeing. A low, guttural sound vibrated in the room, almost like a growl, but layered beneath it were whispers, the same voice I had heard earlier, repeating my name. They circled me, rising and falling in a rhythm that matched my quickening pulse. I took a cautious step back, and my foot landed on a scattered block, sending it skidding across the floor. The sound seemed to trigger a reaction. The shadows recoiled, then lunged again, more aggressively, reaching for me. Panic set in, but my training held me just enough to force measured movement. I remembered the emergency protocols. Check the children, secure exits, maintain calm. My flashlight flickered one last time, and in that brief darkness, the figure leaned closer, tilting its head unnaturally, its eyes locking with mine. A sense of recognition, or was it accusation, hit me in the chest. I felt an almost human sorrow emanating from it, as though it mourned what I could not yet understand. I stumbled backward, bumping into the crib. A child stirred but did not wake, and I realized with horror that I had come dangerously close to violating the very trust one swore to uphold. The ethical weight pressed down like a physical force. My fear could not endanger them, yet here I was, teetering on the edge of an unseen threat. Every instinct told me to retreat, to seek help, yet the shadows had me pinned in place, and the cries, soft, spectral, echoing, seemed to demand attention. Suddenly, a loud crash erupted from the hallway, a chair toppling, the sound exaggerated in the hollow silence. My pulse skyrocketed, and the figure vanished in an instant, leaving only a lingering chill and the faint metallic scent in the air. The nursery felt impossibly empty now, but I could not shake the sense that it was watching me, waiting, testing. I forced my hands to stop shaking, my breath ragged, my thoughts spinning. I checked each room again, every child asleep, seemingly undisturbed. Yet I knew the truth. The orphanage itself had shifted. The walls, the shadows, the very air felt different, charged with a presence I could neither name nor rationalize. My duty remained, protect the children, but the moral lines blurred. Could I act against an unknown force? Or would any intervention make the situation worse? And then, just as I thought I could regain control, I heard it, a soft, deliberate whisper coming from the far end of the corridor, slow and chilling. It carried a sound of intent, a warning or a challenge. I could not tell which. The lights flickered violently, and for a heartbeat, I saw a doorway at the end of the hall open slightly, revealing nothing but black. Yet the air around it rippled as though the darkness itself was breathing. I knew I could not ignore it. I had to follow, had to confront whatever waited in that darkness. Every rational thought told me to run. Every professional instinct told me to investigate. I swallowed hard, gripping my flashlight as though it were a lifeline, and stepped forward. The air grew colder, the shadows thicker, and the whisper repeated, clearer this time, almost urgent. And that's when I saw it again, something I could not explain, something that would force me to question everything I believed about reality, morality, and the very walls of this orphanage. I stepped into the hallway, and the darkness seemed to swallow the beam of my flashlight whole. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to flee, but my duty anchored me. Some part of me still clinging to the idea that I could maintain control, that I could safeguard the children. The air was thick, heavy with the metallic tang of blood and the faint sweetness of rot. My chest heaved. Each breath felt like inhaling shards of ice. The whispers were louder now, overlapping, forming an almost intelligible chant. It was the same voice calling my name, repeating over and over, but layered in dozens of tones. Childlike, pleading, malicious, and humanly sorrowful all at once. I could feel them circling me, brushing past in the periphery of my vision. Yet whenever I turned, the hallways were empty. Shadows detached from the walls, forming twisted shapes that danced just beyond comprehension. One elongated figure drifted across the floor, its head tilting in impossible angles as it followed my movements. I stumbled forward, the floorboards groaning underfoot, each creak sounding like a gunshot in oppressive silence. Toys began to scatter themselves across the hallways, rolling, clattering, forming patterns I could not decipher. Dolls with blank, glassy eyes appeared in the beam of the flashlight, staring, following. I blinked, and they had shifted, closer, angled toward me. I swallowed hard, the metallic tang in the air thickening until it coated my tongue, burned my throat. A door slammed somewhere down the corridor. I flinched, nearly dropping the flashlight, and turned toward the sound. The nursery was empty again, or so I thought. From a far corner, small silhouettes emerged, moving in a way no child could. Their heads swiveled unnaturally, limbs stretching too long, their forms blurred at the edges. I froze. The shadows multiplied, echoing the shapes of the children I was sworn to protect. Yet something was off. Their eyes glowed faintly, hollow and accusatory. It was as though the orphanage itself had twisted them into emissaries of the building's malice. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't leave. My role demanded action, vigilance, responsibility. Yet fear consumed me. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs, sweat beading and dripping down my neck, chilling instantly in the frigid air. The floor beneath me vibrated, subtly at first, then with increasing force, as if the building itself were breathing in sync with the shadows' movements. Whispers became screams, overlapping, crescendoing into an unbearable cacophony. I tried to call out to the children, to assure them, to ground myself in reality, but my voice faltered, cracking and breaking against a storm of noise. The air was alive now, pressure waves pushing me, pulling me, shaping the very hallways around me. The walls seemed to pulse, a heartbeat beneath paint and plaster. I realized with a sickening clarity that I was trapped not just physically, but in some layered reality of the orphanage, a place where past, present, and something else intertwined. Suddenly, one of the shadows lunged, impossibly fast. I barely had time to react. Swinging the flashlight like a club, the beam illuminated a small figure suspended in midair, spinning slowly. Its mouth opened wide in a silent scream, eyes glowing brighter than any human should possess. My stomach turned. I had to make a choice: confront it or retreat and risk leaving the children exposed to whatever haunted this place. I forced myself forward, each step deliberate despite the chaos. A loud crash erupted behind me, and I spun around, only to see the nursery's door wide open, toys flying outward as if expelled by an unseen force. I could hear giggles, not innocent, but layered with something dark, sinister, echoing through the hallways. The shadows were multiplying, swarming, coalescing into forms that resembled the children I knew, and yet were not them. Each one reached out toward me, elongated fingers brushing past my skin, sending a chill so deep it felt as though my very bones were freezing. I fell to my knees, gripping the flashlight as the hallways seemed to twist around me. Doors stretched impossibly long, walls curved where they should be straight, and the shadows moved with deliberate intent. Every instinct told me to flee, but I couldn't abandon my role. I had to know what was happening, to maintain some semblance of professional responsibility. Even as reality unraveled around me, I whispered quiet prayer, one meant to protect, not heal, not summon, but it seemed to do nothing. Then I felt it, a cold brush along my cheek, almost human, almost tender. My eyes darted toward the source. A childlike silhouette floated inches from my face, lips moving in a soft, pleading whisper, and then another and another, until the hall was filled with forms that defied description. Some crying silently, some grinning, some tilting at impossible angles. The whispers formed words I could almost understand, warnings, apologies, questions I could not answer. It was as if the orphanage itself had become a living entity, judging my worth, questioning my morality as a caretaker. I forced myself to rise, stumbling backward, following the twisting hallway, my flashlight beam cutting through the chaos. The metallic smell intensified, overwhelming, almost suffocating. My mind raced. Was this a manifestation of the building's history? Something psychological from my inexperience, or something utterly beyond comprehension? Could rationality exist here, in this place that had become a conduit for fear itself? I had trained for emergencies, for threats, for human unpredictability, but nothing could prepare me for this. And then, for a fraction of a second, it stopped. The shadows froze mid-motion. The whispers halted. The temperature normalized slightly. I dared to glance toward the far end of the hall. There at the open doorway, I saw a single figure, human in form, yet impossibly still, impossibly alive. Its eyes reflected the dim light, unblinking, watching, waiting. I could feel a pull, a magnetic force drawing me closer. The metallic scent lingered, mingled with an odor I could not name. A sense of decay, time, and forgotten sorrow. I stepped forward, compelled, terrified. My professional instincts and my fear collided in a violent conflict. I wanted to protect, to act, to understand, but reason had dissolved. I reached out, trembling, heart hammering, and in that instant, the figure vanished. The shadows surged, and the hallway plunged into total darkness. The whisper returned, singular, deliberate, icy. It was a name I could not place, a warning I could not decode. Yet it struck me to the core. Something was out there, something patient, something sentient. And though the chaos had paused for a heartbeat, I knew it was only waiting, waiting for me to make the next move. The orphanage, the shadows, the children, it all remained unresolved. A living nightmare hovering between reality and something else. I was left alone, or so I thought, but the lingering presence pressed into my mind, a reminder that this night was far from over. When the chaos finally ceased, the orphanage seemed to settle into an eerie, unnatural calm. The hallway lights flickered weakly, casting long, distorted shadows that didn't align with the walls or furniture. Every toy lay where I had left it, or at least it appeared to. Yet something in the air told me that the building was no longer simply an empty structure. It was watching, breathing, waiting. I checked the children again. Each one slept as if nothing had happened, their chests rising and falling in rhythm. Rationally, I told myself that what I had experienced must have been a hallucination, a combination of fatigue, nerves, and the oppressive silence of the orphanage. But the metallic smell lingered in the air, faint but undeniable, and the shadows moved at the edges of my vision, subtle, deliberate. No rational explanation could reconcile what I had witnessed with what I had trained to expect as a caretaker. I spent the remainder of the night pacing, reluctant to rest, reluctant to close my eyes. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant whistle of wind through the broken window panes made me flinch. My professional training urged vigilance. My psyche demanded escape. I tried to convince myself that the children were safe, that my actions or inactions had kept them protected. But a deeper fear gnawed at me. Had I truly kept them safe, or had I only invited something darker into their world by remaining? The ethical weight of that question pressed down like an invisible hand. Morning came slowly. The sun's weak light did little to reassure me. I walked the halls, inspecting each room, listening for sounds that might indicate anything out of the ordinary. The orphanage looked ordinary now, almost mundane, but the memories of what I had seen, shapes, whispers, the inexplicable temperature changes, refused to fade. I tried to record them, to document the anomalies professionally, yet the words felt inadequate. How could I explain shadows that move of their own accord, whispers with no source, or children's toys arranging themselves as if guided by unseen hands? Even in daylight, I could feel the tension lingering in the walls. Every corner seemed slightly off, every doorway subtly distorted. I could hear faint echoes, whispers that dissipated when I focused too hard, as if the building itself was breathing secrets I was never meant to know. And though the staff arrived later, cheerful and oblivious, I realized that my perspective had irrevocably changed. The orphanage was no longer just a building of care and shelter. It had become a place I could not fully comprehend, a space where my professional responsibilities and my personal fears collided. Over the next few days, I tried to rationalize what had happened. Perhaps the building's age and poor maintenance had amplified my imagination. Perhaps the stress of my first night shift had warped perception. I reviewed case reports of similar experiences in other orphanages, reports where staff described unexplainable movements, whispers, and apparitions, but each account seemed to deepen my unease. Was this a coincidence, or was there some darker pattern I had stumbled into? My mind circled the question endlessly, yet no answer satisfied. I began to notice subtle signs that the horror was not truly over. Doors I was certain I had locked appeared ajar. The faint metallic scent returned intermittently, lingering in hallways, the nursery, even near my own belongings when I slept. Shadows pulled in corners longer than they should, moving independently of any light source. And sometimes when I passed a mirror, I caught a glimpse of something behind me. Quick, indistinct, impossible to fully describe. My heart raced each time, and yet a part of me feared confirming what I already suspected, that I was not alone, and perhaps never would be. I questioned my own competence, my mental stability, and my moral responsibility. Had I done enough to protect the children? Had I inadvertently invited this presence into their world? The weight of those doubts pressed heavily on me, sharper than any physical threat. Professional training offered no guidance for moral dilemmas of this magnitude, no protocol for navigating forces that defied logic and reason. I realized bitterly that my first night shift had changed me, not just professionally, but at the very core of my perception. And yet, despite all the rationalizations, a part of me knew the truth. The orphanage had been altered by that night and by me. The shadows, the whispers, the inexplicable phenomena, they had not been entirely vanquished. They lingered patient, waiting for the next moment of weakness. I tried to reassure myself, tried to return to normal routines, but the unease never left. Every creak, every gust of wind, every flicker of light was a reminder. By the time the night ended, I realized that I could no longer see the orphanage as just a place of shelter. It had become something else, something living, something that had judged me. And I knew, with a chill that settled into my bones, that my next shift would not be a beginning, but a continuation. The shadows were patient. The whispers never truly stopped. And somewhere in the dark, something was waiting. I still hear it sometimes, when the world is quiet and my mind begins to wander. That whisper calling my name, soft, deliberate, insistent, not from a child, not from a person, but from somewhere within the walls, within the shadows that cling to corners like a living thing. I remember the first time I heard it, how it froze me in place with the certainty that the orphanage itself was aware of me, studying me, weighing my resolve. And now, even years later, the memory is no less vivid or less terrifying. I've tried to rationalize what happened, attributing it to fatigue, overactive imagination, or the building's age and neglect. But experience has taught me that sometimes the explanations fail. And when they do, you are left with only the certainty of presence, something unseen, patient, and intelligent, lingering in the edges of your perception. I wonder how many times my professional duty has brought me into situations like this, moments where responsibility intersects with forces beyond comprehension, where morality clashes with survival. It haunts me still, the feeling that I was judged, that I failed, that something I cannot see, cannot touch, cannot name, watches the children and me alike. The metallic tang of the air, the shifting shadows, the soft, sorrowful whispers, they exist in memory, but also somewhere beyond memory, waiting for a night when the world sleeps and you are alone. And I realize now that my fear was never truly of the orphanage itself, or even the figures I saw, but the responsibility I bear, the fragility of my own perception, and the helplessness of knowing that not all threats are tangible. Sometimes I think of those shadows, the whispering voices, and I wonder if they wait for the next caretaker, the next person who crosses the threshold unprepared. I wonder if, in some cruel calculus, they always do. The line between the living and the unseen, between what is moral and what is necessary, is thinner than I ever imagined. And so I whisper this as a warning, not just to myself, but to anyone who walks these halls after dark. They remember your name, and when you hear it, it is already too late.